Well, before I begin, I want to thank the Center for Fundamental Rights and their Director General Miklos Santho for having me again. This is my third time here in this beautiful city of Budapest, and it's always a pleasure to be here and speak to such an amazing crowd. It's a growing crowd, and the organization you guys are building is fantastic and is much needed on the world stage. With that said, my speech is not necessarily going to be as bright, but let's get right into it. When globalist elites utter the word illiberalism, they mean to strike fear into the hearts of every decent person across the West. Illiberalism, in their arrogant conception, equates to rolling back hundreds of years of progressive achievements. So it is no wonder that these effete weaklings recoil in horror when Prime Minister Viktor Orban, with a stated policy of illiberal democracy, becomes a globally celebrated right-wing figure who many seek to emulate. President Donald J. Trump, thank you. President Donald J. Trump meets with Orban and declares correctly that there is no smarter and no better leader in the world today than Orban. And journalists, it's true. And journalists from Brussels to Washington to London have a conniption. In the liberal mind, this confirms their worst fear, a dark, scary, authoritarian right-wing agenda of supposed fascism, racism, Christian nationalism, and every other made-up villainy in their overactive imaginations can fathom is finally coming to pass. But the horror is unfounded, for illiberalism pushed by Orban and his imitators does not mean a wholesale rejection of liberal ideas, but rather merely a tempering of the self-inflicted decadence and excesses which have rotted the foundation of the Western world since the end of World War II. After the Second World War, Hungary suffered under the boot of the Soviets behind the Iron Curtain, and nothing can diminish the peril that the Hungarian people faced in that period. In the West, however, free from the strictures of communism and fascism, Americans found themselves attacking the institutions of our society. The churches, the universities, and the other elements of formal structure underwent a complete transformation as the world pulsed with post-war energy, but had no outlet for it. The introduction of instantaneous means of communication and rapid long-distance travel accelerated the evolution of our social structure far beyond its carrying capacity. And so the Enlightenment values that we held so dear began to corrupt us. We destroyed everything because we needed an outlet, a valve, a release for the revolutionary fervor bubbling inside us. And today we are left with a deracinated peoples the world over, scattered and lonely, in need of the very structures that they, their parents, and their grandparents spurned. The sickness embedded in the globalist bureaucratic mind is nothing more than a manifestation to destroy what is beautiful simply because it is beautiful. They think we do not deserve beauty anymore. The world simply cannot be beautiful because we do not deserve it. And that's why when people the world over search for a country that has managed to challenge these ideas better than others, they find Hungary. And when they ponder what qualities they want to see in a leader, they see those that manifest so visibly in Prime Minister Viktor Orban. And let me remind you, Prime Minister Orban is literally rebuilding beautiful buildings across this city here, right now, in this very moment. And the Hungarian people are now blessed with a bastion of the old world beauty which our ancestors sadly took for granted. But under this liberal world order, the individual is nothing but an atomized cog whose fundamental rights must be sacrificed for the better of a collective determined and exclusively picked by a cabal of internationalist experts and technocrats. Untethered to logic and reason, a shape-shifting liberal changes his ideology in a split second to submit to a globalist Politburo. Blind, unwavering obedience to arbitrary edicts from authority is their only principle, and there is no depth to which they will not sink to demonstrate absolute allegiance to their ideological masters. Thus, we must realize that our enemies, the technocratic elites, harbor a deep contempt for what is best for the common man. Their worldview cannot be changed through persuasive rhetoric. As we focus on winning the hearts and minds of the people, we must remember the stakes of the war at hand. Our overriding goal must be to drive a wedge between the people and the corrupt elites that are ruling over them. It is truly an us versus them mentality. And they have declared war against us, and we must be relentless in return, leveraging any tool necessary to crush the forces of liberalism as a cloak to conceal a true agenda as ghastly and inhumane as any in human history. And it is Hungary, under Prime Minister Viktor Orban, that provides the best example for what other countries, especially the United States, should follow. We must unabashedly be proud of our national identity and pursue our enemies boldly and even ruthlessly when necessary. And I want to paraphrase Prime Minister Orban's address during his visit to CPAC, Texas in 2022, saying, "We must unite our forces and stand for our countries in the good times and in the bad times, because the choice is to either give everything you have or to play it safe and lose." So, we must be bold in our proclamations that we will no longer allow Christians to feel social or economic pressure for proclaiming their gospel. We will no longer allow children to be targeted with bizarre sexual propaganda, subverting their innocence and ruining their sanctity for the pleasure of deviance. We will no longer tolerate mobs of aggrieved victim groups who march like conquering hordes to erase the vestiges of Western civilization. And no longer will the family unit be sacrificed and replaced with a self-serving hedonism. We must not hesitate to use state force to bring about a swift end to any practices that are an existential threat to our culture, to our society, and to our civilization. And if that makes us illiberal, so be it. Because for far too long, conservatives have been willing to embrace liberal values to their own great peril. Conservatives have embraced the notion that simply having free trade and free markets are unassailable, or these are unassailable concepts. Instead of presenting a coherent vision to captivate the masses, conservatives have been content to succumb to the complacency and let the whims of global capital shape the world. This has created a faux prosperity based on debt and the importation of cheap foreign labor that has come at the cost of rising crime, alienation, hopelessness, and a sharp decline in the national unity. Orban's overwhelming electoral mandate in Hungary demonstrates his legitimacy and shows how his illiberal rule is actually popular and democratic. Orban stands tall for Christian values, refuses to kowtow to degeneracy, and uses law and order to put subversives at bay. Isn't this what all conservatives should strive to do? Now, rather than being slaves to simple slogans of free market ideology, this always seems to prevent us from achieving our goals. Instead, we must be pragmatic. We must adopt a form of Orbanism for the nations across the world, including in the United States. And we must not hesitate to use government power to seize the moment and achieve our ends whenever possible. Hungary's achievements must be studied and emulated in other nations. For example, the family-friendly policies of Hungary have given a better deal for women than the feminists the world over ever could, putting their needs at the center of public policy, allowing them the dignity of having a large, loving family while also being able to pursue their dreams in the workplace. And Hungary also serves as a much-needed voice for peace and diplomacy on the world stage, where apparently conflict and belligerence have seemingly become an acceptable norm. Over the past year, we have seen a reorienting of the world based on populist and conservative principles, from the election of President Javier Milei in Argentina to the continued successes of President Nayib Bukele in El Salvador, as well as the strengthening of conservative parties across Europe. We can conclude that the people are tired of the corruption of their decadent elites and are looking for new options. While the particulars of these movements may differ based upon the needs of their countries and the personalities of their leaders, the tone and tenor of these movements are all the same. They are aggressive denunciations of the worldview of liberalism that has offered promises of a better world but delivered the exact opposite. And later this year, we will have the biggest victory of them all in America when President Donald J. Trump returns to power, overcoming the most coordinated and diabolical opposition in history. The globalists have charged President Trump with countless phony crimes, attempted to bankrupt him and his family, imprisoned his most high-profile supporters, and waged a complete campaign of propaganda and defamation that would have made Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin blush. But this is all to no avail, because the more these perfidious forces attack President Trump, the stronger he becomes, and the more people awaken to the criminal nature of the system that he is fighting to upend. And when he wins, it will be a death blow to globalism that will have ramifications the world over. And it will be our chance to rebuild what has been destroyed, to reclaim what has been taken from us, and to renew a civilization that has been a jewel and a blessing for the peoples of the entire world. And this is why we are all here today. This is why, despite it all, we are still optimistic. Because despite the obstacles that stand in our way, we understand that God is on our side, that we are the forces for righteousness. We are the brave and valiant rising to be champions for the common man, defending the values that are inherently good: tradition, honor, decency, morality, selflessness, compassion, and virtue. And if these are the tenets that define illiberalism, then I proudly proclaim myself an illiberal on this stage today, and I await the rise of the illiberal movement across the world as it has risen here in Hungary. And with this, my friends, I want to conclude that President Donald J. Trump offers the only opportunity for the reforging of America in the image of greatness that it once held. Much as Prime Minister Viktor Orban rebuilt Hungary from the ashes of its communist past, President Trump is the champion who can and will restore America to the nation we all aspire for it to be. President Trump is willing and able to be the retribution of the American people against this international elite who deign to dictate how we should live our lives. We say no more, never again. The American government must be America first, just as the Hungarian government must be Hungary first, no exceptions. Thank you so much.